Alright, hello, what's going on everybody? Welcome to session 2 of The Lord of the Rings, a close reading of The Lord of the Rings. This is, as I said, session 2. I was planning to do it last night, but I got home late from work, so we're doing it tonight instead. We're going to be kind of changing things up a little bit. So with the first session and with my other podcast on the Bible, I've been doing a lot more slow pace, right? It's a simple, read one or two paragraphs, half a chapter, whatever, half a passage in the Bible's case, and then analyze it, really closely in detail, every single word, going through exactly what each thing means. For the Lord of the Rings, I still think that would be something, I liked that idea and I still do, but I don't know if it's exactly the most achievable thing right off the gate, because for something like that, with something like Lord of the Rings, for one thing, I'm not as knowledgeable in Lord of the Rings as I am with the Bible, actually, and it's a little bit harder to make some of these extrapolations right off the bat without having, without having already read The Hobbit, which I have, but we have it on live already, and B, without an extensive knowledge of, Tolkien's whole legendarium. And while I have read, the Silmarillion and some of his other works that were later published by his son, I haven't read them in detail very recently, and so it's harder for me to make some of these takes. And then another thing is that just it gets a little bit stale. There's not as much to talk about, and without other people on the chat yet, obviously, because I just started off and we're very small, I think it's going to instead be more enjoyable for all of us if I just kind of read the chapter, but maybe not the whole chapter, but a good chunk of it, and just kind of give, small takes here and there of things that jump out as me as I'm reading, and things that, might be a little confusing or need to be talked about. So, with that said, we'll probably get started in just a second. I'm probably going to reread the first section, what we did on session 1. I'm not going to go over it in detail, but just reread it to set the tone and pace. Looks like we've got somebody on chat. Oh, by the way, is the chat working? Can somebody try to get on that? Here, real quick. I'm going to test this myself, because the other day the chat was not working on my last stream for the Bible podcast, or at least my parents were having difficulty. So I'm going to have to check on that. Give me 1 second. Hi, Miss Lindsay. Alright, so there you go. It looks like the chat is working correctly, since you were able to comment. I'm guessing that possibly my parents didn't get on the live replay correctly, but I'm not certain. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with chapter 1 of the A Long Expected Party, and this is the Fellowship of the Ring. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as 50. At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess apparently perpetual youth, as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. It will have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But so far, trouble had not come, and as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with most of his relatives, except of course the Sackville Bagginses, and he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends, until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir, and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd. "You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo one day, "and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together." At that time Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year the Bagginses had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End. But now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn. Bilbo was going to be 11-1, 111, a rather curious number, and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Took himself had only reached 130, and Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. So, just one thing to note, right, is we do finally get confirmation of exactly how old hobbits are supposed to be, right? 111 is a very respectable age for a hobbit. So we were talking about that. You know, you start the book off and you're scratching your head saying, okay, how old is 111 for a hobbit, you know? You know it's a fantasy novel and you're thinking, are they like dwarves or elves? Do they normally live exceptionally old? Well, older than us, maybe, but not that much older. 130 seems to sort of be a real standout age for the old Took. But let's continue. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and the rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. That's such a fun little paragraph there. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself, in number 3 Bagshot Road, just below Bag End. Which, I've always been curious, what does this, like, number 3 Bagshot Row mean? Is there a postal system in Hobbiton? You know, that's the way that sounds. Number 3 Bagshot Row, just below Bag End. Okay, so let me think about this for a second. Bagshot Row, just below Bag End. Okay, so there's a row of houses called Bagshot Row that's just below Bag End, and this is number 3. So this is the third house in that row. Okay. It still does sound like a postal service, to be honest. I feel like I need We're gonna have to. This is another thing to keep our eye on. What the first thing was Bilbo's. The first thing to keep a look for was how introverted Bilbo was. That was one thing I wanted to keep an eye on. And now this is a second thing. If the hobbits have any sort of postal service or some kind of stricter way of counting addresses, I guess, because I wouldn't expect this kind of, this reads like a modern address, number 3 Bagshot Road, just below Bag End. I mean, not exactly, but pretty close. Alright, let's continue. They lived on the hill itself in number 3 Bagshot Road, just below Bag End. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo. Excuse me, okay, first off, it's Mr. Bilbo. But, gentle hobbit is, like, the best word ever. Just, I feel like, so, in case some of you didn't know, I am an aspiring fantasy author myself. I feel like this is always something that, like, you want to do, is create these, like, fun little words, like gentle hobbit or something. But whenever you try to make them, they always sound really dumb in your own head. You're like, that sounds so stupid, like D&D is kind of what it sounds like, but somehow it just works. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit, just, like, I can totally buy that. I don't know why. It's probably because it wasn't written by me. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said, the gaffer declared. With perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables, and the matter of roots, especially potatoes. The gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. So, the especially potatoes, any of you movie watchers definitely get the, well, it's not... Yeah, foreshadowing there, right? The potatoes line for the Lord of the Rings is one of the most famous. So of course, Sam's gaffer's father is the leading authority on potatoes in the neighborhood, and then the including himself bit is just Tolkien is really, like, what's the word? Maybe cheeky, kind of. Really just clever, I guess. Clever in his prose. He has a lot of, like, fun jokes and parentheses and italics and, semicolons, all this fun stuff going on. This is, like, a really fun passage to read out loud, if you couldn't tell already, right? I really enjoy reading this first chapter. There's just a bunch of fun things to read. So let's keep on going. But what about this Frodo that lives with him? Asked old Noakes of Bywater. Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandy book, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton would go looking for a wife any way there in Buckland, where folk are so queer. And no wonder they're queer, put in Daddy Twofoot, the gaffer's next-door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River and right agin the old forest, that's a dark, bad place, if half the tales be true. You're right, Dad, said the gaffer. Not that the brandy bucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. So, I feel like I just, like, read through all that. There's, like, a lot that we probably should talk about. I just cut off real quick there because, and that isn't natural after talking about boats is kind of funny. They fool about with boats on that big river. That's so unnatural. Be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is a nice young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him, till he was drowned. Something you also probably noticed. It might have been clouded a little bit by my, I stumbled over a few words there, and I sort of changed voice. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue doing that or not. Maybe. But Tolkien does start to do a little bit of, like, diction here. There is some... what's the other word? Yeah, diction works well. You get and write again without the A, said by Daddy Two-Foot, and then here now the gaffer till he was drowned with the D, right? Tolkien does do a pretty good job of this, of showing different dictions and registers. There's another word, I'm mad I can't think of it. There's another word that I like even better. But those two work well enough, right? He does it especially well with his more, like, noble characters, right? The way that he is able to write, somebody like Gandalf, for instance, the way that Gandalf can talk both like a hero from King Arthur and also like a generic hobo from England is pretty awesome. The way that he bounces back and forth between that is one thing we will definitely have to keep an eye for. But with the Hobbits, this may actually be the strongest point. The use of it is like he's coming up with these actual fake spellings and words and things to help illustrate the way that the Hobbits, some of them are very rustic in their in their dialect. I actually have heard some people say that they don't like when authors do this usually. I think that's typically when like it's sort of a racial issue, if you see what I mean. Like a Huckleberry Finn would be an example or something like that. Or they feel like that it's just kind of like a cheap way of like showing, oh, this person isn't very smart, they talk funny. But I think the way Tolkien has done it here is pretty conservative, all things considered. It's only 2 words, but those 2 words alone are enough to tell you the way that they talk, but don't necessarily make them sound like idiots. It's just they have an accent more than anything else. So another thing is you start to see like right off the bat that the Hobbits have this super deep distrust for anybody else, even anybody else, not even other beings or anything. Like literally just they're like next door neighbors. Like this is like people from Ohio like being well, I guess a good real life example is people from Ohio like hating people from Michigan. Like that's what this feels like, right? But it's even closer than that. It's like 2 bordering counties. Like they're just across the river from each other, and they're like, they're so weird over there on the other side of the river, right? The Hobbits are very local and very gossipy, prone to gossip. And I still just love the part about boats. Well, let's keep going here. Drowned, said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course. But hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. They have a passion that I do not in that regards. Family history is not that interesting, to be honest. I'm not sure if there are very many people who would say they have a passion in family history, but the hobbits do, so... Well, so they say, said the gaffer. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Primula Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Took's daughter. And Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin, once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. Which, I don't. I feel like I need to read this again and actually try to visualize it like on a chart. Okay. Mr. Drogo married Miss Primula, and she was Bilbo's first cousin. Okay, so just simple cousin on the mother's side. Wait. And Mr. Drogo was his second cousin, presumably on the father's side. That's not explicitly said, but I'm just assuming that. And so then Frodo is his first and second cousin. First on the mother's side, second cousin on the father's side, once removed either way. Okay. It's actually not that complicated, but it just sounds complicated. Moving on. And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, Old Master Gorbodoc, as he often did after his marriage. he being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbodoc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Mr. Frodo only a child and all. I've heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight, said old Noakes, and it was Drogo's weight as sunk the boat. And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her in after him, said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. Okay, so, something to talk about here. A lot of this is a piece of information that I partly, you can gather it pretty easily, if you read a lot of old fairy tales and stuff, but this is something that was brought up in the Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, which is kind of what gave the inspiration for this podcast, and especially the one that I'm doing on the Bible. But that millers are a very consistently sketchy character in medieval lore, and with good reason, because a miller mills things, and as such they essentially have a monopoly on grain and grain goods, and since grain goods are like vital for survival, they essentially have like a monopoly on food almost, like, and because of that they're able to make outlandish prices and things. So there's a reason why millers usually aren't liked very much, but that's just something that I definitely missed the first time I was reading, and I'm sure many of you probably would have also missed, is that, you know, Sandyman the Hobbiton miller, like, you're instantly supposed to say, oh, it's the miller, like, the miller is like the tax collector, not quite as extreme, but like the tax collector for the medieval era, if you know your Jewish history, excuse me, and biblical history, right? Like the tax collectors were the people that nobody liked because of what they did for a job. But tax collectors a bit stronger because they were like literal traitors of the nation and religion, but same kind of vibe. So that is something to remember. But it is definitely funny that you just like can't instantly help but like not liking Sandyman, and like instantly knowing that he's just like the worst sort of, like, you know, that sort of slime who just like says stuff to like make trouble and stuff, and like totally, I don't know, you know what I mean, like you can just totally imagine him as like the slimy ruffian at the table who like raises his voice and everybody looks at him like, what? like he expects everybody's gonna be like, oh yeah, that's so fascinating, and now they're just like, why would you say something like that? And the gaffer pretty much says that. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. There isn't no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those queer Bucklanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall, a regular warren by all accounts. Old Master Gorbodoc never had fewer than a couple of 100 relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. I should have probably stopped earlier. That one sentence is interesting to me. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking farther for the cause of trouble. That's an interesting way of phrasing that. They're looking for the cause of trouble. Like in the US today, we would just say, without looking for trouble. Looking for the cause of trouble feels like it's saying something different, but in the context of the sentence, I'm fairly certain it just means the same thing, more or less. But I'm trying to think, what would that even be meaning? Looking farther for the cause of trouble. Is that like a weird, like, double-layered joke back at the Sandymen? Like, because the Sandyman is looking farther for the cause of trouble when he says they were pushing each other? But that doesn't make any sense, because the Sandyman obviously isn't in a boat. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. Looking further for the cause. I think it's just like looking for trouble. Second thing, yes, Master Gorbadoc had 100 relations in his house. The guy was apparently a people person, and he had a huge house. So, yeah. Continuing, but I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get Bag End. That time when he went off and was thought to be dead. And then he comes back and orders them off. And he goes on living and never looking a day older, bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir and has all the papers made out proper. The Sackville Bagginses won't ever see the insides of Bag End now, or it is to be hoped not. I'm not sure if that's actually very strong alliteration, but it felt strong when I said it, because I kind of messed up my first S. The Sackville Bagginses won't never see the inside of Bag End now, or is to be hoped not. Another thing, there is another one of these Hobbit tavern talk diction things. Won't never, a double negative there. Classic double negatives always get us in trouble. And no, he's not using it on purpose. It's not the Sackville Bagginses will. That's not the meaning. It is won't ever, but he just says won't never because his grammar obviously isn't like the most refined. That is something that I want to know. I want to know if Tolkien ever uses a double negative. I think there are ways you can use double negatives correctly, but I don't really feel like that's a discussion to have right now. Let's finish the chapter. We can talk about double negatives at the end, maybe. There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger, a visitor on business from Mickle Delving in the West Farthing. All the top of your hill is full of tunnels, packed with chests of gold and silver, and jewels, by what I've heard. Okay, another one here. Jewels is spelt like 2 O's. So, I tried to pronounce that how I would say that. Jewels instead of like jewels. I don't know. There's not a remarkable difference, but it does kind of sound different in my head, at least. Then you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the gaffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems to be no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. Okay, an interesting point real quick. Tunnel making has a hyphen in it. This is something Tolkien does a lot, is hyphenate words that we wouldn't hyphenate, that we would leave 2 different words. Or take words that, like, and put them together literally into one word that other people might have hyphenated, right? A good example was, remember I was talking about gentle hobbit is 1 word. That's not, like, hyphenated or 2 words. I feel like most writers would have written it probably like a hyphen, but the no hyphen makes it feel much more natural because we say gentleman like 1 word, right? And gentle hobbit, like being that same sort of like, this is just the natural way people talk, makes it feel so much more believable. This type of hyphenating, but I know of no tunnel making. There's actually a lot of theories about this. Some of them are really interesting. I've read up on them. One person's theory was that it's sort of like Tolkien's way of denoting. So, okay, this is going to be a long tangent. Tolkien's frame story is that he's actually like a scholar who discovered this text and translated it. And one of the main theories is that this is like sort of his way of denoting that this hyphenated word, like tunnel making, is just 1 word in the language he's translating from. Like that there's a word that just means tunnel making. Tunneling, I guess, tunneling would probably be what a normal English person would say. But there's a slight difference between tunneling and tunnel making, if you get my gist. I would say tunneling makes it sound like you're like actively like digging with your hands. Tunnel making just means like making tunnels, so like probably like hiring other people to do it kind of thing. But I think the main purpose of these hyphens personally is as a way to help the reader pace their reading in a purposeful way. So like if there was no hyphen Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it. But I know of no tunnel making. Like, you like, pause it, like, tunnel making, but with the hyphen, you read it faster, naturally, so as one word, is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making, right? I think it's mostly a way to control the flow of the reader's syllables and the way that they're reading. Tolkien does that a lot. He uses semicolons like nobody's business. He uses regular colons less so, but sometimes, and commas and parentheses and quotation marks and all the jazz, the italics. He has done so much of that in this passage that he really works the words in his sentences and the punctuation like they're like an art form, like there's a very nice rhythm and rhyme to the way that these sentences are written, that like you can just read them and know how to read them in the right paces and the right stops and emphases and things like that, which is really, really nice for me, but it also just makes the text so much more interesting to read a lot of the times. So let's keep going. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back, a matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. I had not long come prentice to old Holman. Okay, so real quick, prentice as in like apprentice, or apprentice, excuse me. I'm trying to figure out now if prentice is a just shortened version of apprentice, or if apprentice is like if prentice is actually the root word and apprentice is a compound word, like of some sort. Alright, I'm gonna real quick like search this. Let's see. Let's look. Okay, just archaic for another term for apprentice. What about? Okay, so no, I think it is a apprentice, as far as I can tell. It is like the more normal version. Even in Tolkien's time, prentice is like a shortened version, a little slang. I had not long come prentice to master to old. Excuse me, I don't know why I cannot read that. That word prentice keeps throwing me off. I'm not used to it, and it is kind of hard to say, actually. I had not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at Bag End, helping him to keep folks from trampling and trespass. Oh my, I am... Okay, let's try that again. I had not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at Bag End, helping him to keep folks from trampling and why do I know I've heard this word before, but I can't think of how you say it. Is it trappasing? And trappasing all over the garden while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say, but there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. So that's the gaffer's fun that he like that event from the end of The Hobbit is like ancient, okay, not ancient, but like far off lore to them almost, that the gaffer's like, back in my day I remember when Bilbo came back from his adventure. It's just funny because Bilbo, it's easy to forget that Bilbo is so old because he doesn't seem that old, right? And all these time jumps, but like to them, like the gaffer was just a boy when he started off and now he's an old man, right? But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in and out of Bag End. Crazy about stories of the old days he is, and he listens to all Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Okay, this is one of my favorite Master Gamgee lines. Mr. Bilbo, so here we go, another one of those Hobbit diction things, has learned him his letters. That is, if you have taken 4th grade grammar, you will know that we do not say learned him. We teach people, we learn things, if that makes any sense. That's not exactly a great definition, but you I'm sure you understand the point. It's funny. That's like one of those lessons that I remember learning in grammar, and I'm like, of course, who would ever say learned him his letters? Like, what? Who would ever say that? But apparently the gaffer did. So some people do need that lesson. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, and letters being, right, he's taught him how to read and write, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. And so this is the moment when we suddenly learn, we didn't even know this in The Hobbit, that like most hobbits are illiterate, right? And in hindsight, that seems like kind of a, well, yeah, no, duh, they live in a somewhat medieval setting. Most people in the Dark Ages, especially in the Middle Ages too, were illiterate, so that kind of shouldn't surprise us, but it still is a little bit of a revelation, like, wait, what? What do you mean? Like, you don't know your letters, Gaffer Gamgee? Apparently not. And not even that, it's just, there's something interesting, and I think it's a wise, I feel like it's a wise tidbit to put in, like, just a small little joke, right? That the way that societies, like, people and classes will, things that they don't have the ability to reach, right, that are far above them and stuff, they won't, instead of like wanting those things, over time they'll just start to like fear those things. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but like the gaffer doesn't just not know his letters, right, and think, it's not even that he just thinks it's a waste of time to try to learn that as potato farmer. He literally, like, yeah, learning his letters, like, could harm him somehow, right? That, like, he sees books and reading as, like, an alien thing that, like, only those hobbits do is kind of interesting, and something, like, to think about, you know, the way that people do that with a lot of things, actually, but Tolkien doesn't go much into detail on it right here. He does a little bit more. Let's keep reading. Elves and dragons, I say to him, cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. And I might say to others, he added, with a look at the stranger and the miller. Sorry. Elves and dragons, I says to him, cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. That's such a, like, old father sort of saying. Like, you know how like fathers always have, like, those sayings like that they just come up with. Like, this totally just feels like not something my dad would say, because we don't talk about elves and dragons, but you know what I mean, right? Like, I could totally see this. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. Okay, so there's another Hobbit diction, I says to him. Not correct. But, this is also the moment when we suddenly learn, we probably should have been catching this, right? The whole, like, oh, the Bagginses are wealthy and the Tooks are wealthy and respectable, right, in the first book, in The Hobbit. And then now in this, right, we're starting to learn, oh, Baggins is really wealthy, and oh, there's the miller, and now there's like these people in the tavern, and they have a different diction from Bilbo. And oh, some of them are illiterate. We probably should have seen this coming, that there's some sort of class in the Hobbit society, a class structure. But it's only here that we kind of like get told that, and even still we don't really get told it straightly. It's just, don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters. And that's the first, like, that's the, when suddenly we realize, oh, so like Frodo is Sam's better in some way. Not that he's like actually better necessarily, but you get what I mean, that he's like a higher rank, or his master or lord in some sense. Another thing to note about this line, this is the second piece of Gamgee foreshadowing, right? We already had that first little thing about potatoes coming up again here, but this time, don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, he says to Sam. Well, to those of us who know the story, Sam does get mixed up in the business of his betters, and he definitely lands up in trouble too big for him. I think Sam himself might remember this moment later in the book, so that'll be fun when we get to that. And I might say it to others, he added with a look at the stranger and the miller. It's just fun. I love the like tavern dynamics of the hobbits in this chapter. It's so much fun. I wish we got more of this in the book, but of course people aren't adventures and quests. They aren't sitting gossiping with people, but you get what I mean. Let's go probably finish this section here at the tavern. We got 2 or 3 more paragraphs left, and then we'll probably call it a day. We're already at a good 45 minutes. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. Ooh, that's interesting, right? Up until now, it seemed that the gaffer had a really commanding presence in this discussion and in Hobbiton, right? We even heard that. There was a line, something along the lines of, no folk had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the gaffer, right? And we had this thing that he was suddenly like, he was the man of the hour, right? And he had a presence over the inn, and it seemed that he kind of had control in the conversation too, but it's suddenly now that like, but they don't believe him about what? The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits. That's what the next sentence goes on to say, right? So this is the younger hobbits don't quite believe the gaffer about this story about seeing Bilbo come back with just a few bags of treasure, right? They don't really believe him about that one, but they might not necessarily say it out against him. Here, though, this next couple sentences, this is a pretty interesting objection. But he is likely enough been adding to what he brought at first, argued the miller, voicing common opinion. He's often away from home, and look at the outlandish folk that visit him, dwarves coming at night, and that old wandering conjurer, Gandalf and all. You can say what you like, gaffer, but Bag End's a queer place, and its folk are queerer. So the miller's argument is actually kind of convincing, because it is true. Bilbo travels a lot, and he has a lot of weird visitors. We already kind of got that previously, and we'll see it a lot more as we keep going. So this is actually a pretty clever, a pretty good argument on the miller's part. I don't know if the gaffer really could have any obvious argument against that, any counter argument, except the common reasoning that who's just giving Bilbo free money? Right? That's probably the real argument, but they aren't gonna think of that. But like in the world economics, Bilbo isn't really that important, so I highly doubt that dwarves are just coming to him and giving him money. Just cause, you know, even if he goes off away, it's not like it's that easy to find a dragon hoard of gold lying around, you know, and kill the dragon and steal the gold. Like, it's not that easy to just get money. But they aren't gonna think of that, or at least they won't believe that. We had just a few passages ago, right, that out east there was tons of gold. I don't remember exactly where it was. Oh, the gaffer said it. They were mostly full of treasure picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say. Right, so there is this perception in the Shire that there's all this riches and, you know, hoards and things out in the world. But the hobbits just like to, you know, sit by themselves in their nice, quiet Shire. The gaffer's retort is pretty good, though. And you can say what you like about what you know no more of than you do of boating, Mr. Sandyman, retorted the gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. There's some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. But they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam that says that everyone's going to be invited to the party. There's going to be presents, mark you. Presents for all, this very month as is. Alright. So the gaffer comes back. Not really with a counter argument, but he tries to put the Sandyman back in his place, right? If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. Honestly, it's kind of a pretty true sentence, right? A lot of the times, doing what's right will be looked at as queer, right? The best people sometimes are the queer people. But, hey, if that's queer, then we can do with a bit more of it. In Bilbo's case especially, since we've already been told, you know, he's a very kindly hobbit. His little example about those who wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls, it feels kind of directed, right? Like, he's calling somebody out here. Like, this isn't just that sounds like an actual experience almost. Like, there's some not far away. I'm not gonna say who, but there's some people, like, definitely on the top of the gaffer's head. Like, he knows who he's thinking of, that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. It's funny that, like, who are these people? I have no idea, but one might guess that the Sandyman is probably on that list. Perhaps. But they do things proper at Bag, and our Sam says that everyone's going to be invited to the party, which will turn out to be, if not exactly true, not too much of an exaggeration. Pretty much everybody is invited. And there's going to be presents, mark you, presents for all, this very month as is. And that's going to do it for us in this one. Hope you all enjoyed that reading of a decent section of The Lord of the Rings, the first chapter. So yeah, the overall main takeaways is that the gaffer is so much fun. I just love the gaffer. He's great. And that Tolkien is doing a really good job here using grammar, punctuation, italics, hyphens, the whole shebang to really capture the way that his characters are speaking, but also create a really nice rhythm and fluency to his text, right? It's hard to explain exactly, but like really, like all of those pauses and emphases and things like that I was putting in there, like that's almost always in the text in some way. Like it's a comma or a parentheses or an italics or it's hyphenated or something, because in this first section at least for sure he is being very playful with the way he's writing, which is a lot of fun. It's really fun to read this. So next time we will probably get to the actual party. Maybe, probably not, but we will get to see Gandalf the Grey, a timeless character, so that's going to be a lot of fun. If you liked the video, then hey, like the stream, subscribe so you can see the rest of the stuff that I'm doing. We're going to have the next, it's going to be pretty much every Monday night and probably every Friday night. Monday is going to be the Bible podcast. Friday is going to be the Lord of the Rings. I might actually throw in, I'm going to have to see how this Lord of the Rings one goes. That was enjoyable. That was fun. It's hard, though. I think this kind of style thing really does work better either if I'm like an expert in the text, which, okay, I'm not an expert in the Bible, but it's easier to make extrapolations about the Bible than it is about Lord of the Rings, or if I'm like reading it for the first time, right? If I'm reading it for the first time, it's a lot more like my real-time thoughts and experiences and stuff. It's just a lot more genuine, I think, and there's more intrigue and things that I'm gonna notice and stuff and things to talk about, right? Like a lot of this is just, these are things that I already knew, right? These are things I've already noticed reading Lord of the Rings before and listening to all the podcasts and things like that. So that's something I might have to check, think about, decide if I want to continue this Lord of the Rings one, or if I want to disband it and start a different book that I haven't read before, or if I want to just do both, because, I mean, hey, I probably have the time on my hands. If I was to do a different book, right now I'm listening actually to the audiobook for The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archive, I believe, of Brandon Sanderson, and I've been really enjoying that. It's very good, but the problem would be that, like, I've already started it, I'm already more than halfway, so like doing that on live, I would be like starting us 3/4 of the way through the first book of a series, which is just weird. So I might do that. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. But thank you all for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Until then.